Welcome to Mythic Slumber. Tonight we journey to ancient Sumer, where the first city rose from clay, and the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, watched over humanity. Pull the blanket close. Let the Euphrates River carry your thoughts away. We are going to meet the architects of civilization and discover who is really watching from the stars. Picture this. You are standing in the mud of ancient Mesopotamia 5,000 years before Christ. The air is thick with the scent of rotting reeds and distant water. Above you, the stars hang so close you feel you could touch them. But something is wrong. The landscape is too wild, too chaotic for the order you sense coming. This is the Edin, the land between rivers where civilization will be born. And tonight we discover who really built it. To understand the arrival of the gods, you must first understand the ground they landed on. Do not picture the dry, cracked dunes of the modern desert. Picture something heavier, wetter, and far more difficult. Picture the Edin. This is the land between the rivers, southern Iraq in the deep past, 5,000, perhaps 6,000 years ago. If you were to stand here before the first city rose, the first sensation would not be sight, but weight. The heat here does not simply sit, it presses. It wraps around the lungs like a wet wool blanket. The air smells of three things: the sweet rotten fermentation of the marshes, the metallic tang of drying silt, and the sharp electric scent of water that has travelled 1,000 miles to find a place to rest. There is no stone here. That is the first thing a traveller notices. There are no forests of cedar to offer shade, no caves of limestone to offer shelter, no veins of ore to mine for copper or tin. There is only the horizon, flat as a hammered plate, stretching out until it blurs into a haze of heat, and underfoot there is the mud. This mud, the alluvial clay, is the flesh of the country. It is deep, rich, and treacherous. In the spring, when the snows melt far away in the Zagros Mountains, the water rushes down and turns the plain into a soup of brown slurry. Walking becomes a slow, sucking struggle. You lift a foot, and the earth tries to keep it. You lay down a mat to sleep, and the damp seeps through to your bones. It is a landscape that resists the human shape. It does not want to support walls, it wants to pull them down. It does not want to be mapped, it wants to shift. And yet, it is alive. In the marshes to the south, the reeds grow so thick they create walls of green 12 feet high, a maze of rustling corridors where lions and boars hide in the shadows. The air hums with the vibration of 1 billion insects. A sound like a high-tension wire that never slackens. The water boils with carp. The sky is thick with waterfowl rising in clouds that blot out the sun. It is a place of overwhelming, chaotic abundance. It is life, but it is life without order. Through this chaos cut the two great arteries, the Tigris and the Euphrates. In later myths, men would say these rivers flowed from the eyes of Tiamat, the dragon of chaos, and looking at them, you can believe it. These are not the polite banked rivers of Europe that stay in their beds. These are muscular, serpentine forces that wander where they please. One year, the channel runs here. The next year, after the flood, it runs 5 miles to the east, leaving the old bed to bake into a scar of white salt. For the early people scattered across this plain, the people who would one day call themselves the Sag-Giga, the black-headed people, survival was a game of chance played against a house that always won. They lived in huts made of bundled reeds, fragile baskets turned upside down against the wind. When the waters rose, they packed their few belongings and moved. When the waters fell, they returned to plant grain in the wet silt, hoping the sun wouldn't burn it to dust before the harvest. They were guests in a hostile house. They had no metal to cut the earth, no stone to anchor a temple. No writing to remember the names of their fathers. They were small, and the world was vast. It is here, in this precarious, mud-slicked silence, that the feeling begins. You can feel it if you stand still long enough in the marsh. It is the sensation that this place is a stage waiting for a play to begin. The landscape is too potent, too rich, to remain wild forever. It feels like a machine that has been built but not yet switched on. The clay is waiting for a hand. The water is waiting for a command. The reeds are waiting to become a pen. And then the sun goes down. Night in the Edin is not like night in the city. There is no glow on the horizon, no softness to the dark. The sun drops like a stone, and the temperature plummets. The heat of the day evaporates, leaving a chill that sharpens the senses. The noise of the insects changes pitch, a nocturnal rhythm that sounds like breathing, and the sky opens in the dry air of the desert. Without the interference of smoke or light, the stars are not distant pinpricks. They're heavy. They hang low, like lamps suspended on invisible chains, so close you feel you could climb a high dune and brush them with your fingertips. The Milky Way is a slash of white fire, a bruise of light across the black vault. To the ancients, this was not a vacuum. It was the great above. It was the ocean of the night, the realm of An. If you lie back on a mound of dry clay and watch that crushing expanse, the feeling of solitude vanishes, replaced by something more unnerving, the feeling of being watched. The geometry of the heavens is perfect, silent, and terrifyingly orderly, in stark contrast to the chaotic, shifting mud below. The planets do not wander aimlessly like the river. They march, they follow tracks, they keep time. It is easy, lying there in the dark, to understand why the first stories were not about earth spirits or forest ghosts, but about them, the ones who came down, the Anunnaki. If this journey through ancient Mesopotamia is helping you drift toward sleep, a gentle like would mean the world to our channel. We pour our hearts into these stories, and your support helps more insomniacs find their way to peaceful rest. Now, let the ancient mud carry you deeper into dreams. The word itself carries the sound of a descent, an heaven, key, earth. Those who from heaven to earth came, in the silence of the 4th millennium, looking up at that crowded sky, it does not feel impossible. In fact, it feels like the only explanation that makes sense. How else could the order of those stars be brought down to this messy, flooded earth? How else could the mud learn to stack itself into a ziggurat? How else could the wild river learn to run in a straight line? The ancient alien theory, in its modern form, speaks of rockets and genetics and mining operations, but strip away the chrome and the sci-fi language, and you're left with a very old, very human emotion that starts right here, in the mud of Segment 1. It is the feeling of orphanhood, the sense that we are too fragile, too soft, and too small to have conquered this violent landscape on our own. We look at the impossible suddenness of our own civilization, the way we went from hunting boars in the reeds to calculating the movement of Jupiter in a single heartbeat of history, and we ask, did we really do this alone? The Sumerian answer, whispered in the rustle of the reeds, is no. We did not. We were found. We were taught. We were engineered. The wind shifts, blowing from the north, carrying the dry scent of the mountains where the gods were said to dwell before they descended. The marshes go quiet as if holding their breath. The stage is set. The raw materials are waiting. The mud for the bricks, the reeds for the stylus, the water for the blood. The Edin is ready. Whatever came next, whether it was a slow evolution of human ingenuity or a sudden arrival of visitors from the stars, it started here. It started with the realization that the mud below and the stars above were two halves of a broken whole, waiting to be joined, and the only thing standing between them, shivering in the cold night air, was us. History usually is a slow creature. It moves like a glacier or a river delta, inch by inch, century by century. A village adds a mud wall. 1,000 years later, the wall is stone. But in Sumer, something different began to unfold. If you look at the timeline of human events, what happened on the banks of the Euphrates roughly 6,000 years ago looks less like evolution and more like an explosion. One moment there are scattered hamlets, people living in reed huts, hunting wild pig, sewing skins with bone needles, watching the moon to know when to plant. Their lives are circular, bound by the seasons, indistinguishable from the lives of their ancestors 5,000 years prior. Then the page turns and everything changes at once. In the blink of a geological eye, the reed huts are gone, replaced by monumental architecture. The mud has been disciplined into baked brick. The chaotic skyline of the marsh is broken by the vertical arrogance of the ziggurat, a man-made mountain rising 300 feet into the air, challenging the very sky. But it wasn't just the buildings, it was the mind inside the buildings. Suddenly, without precedent, there was mathematics. There was the division of the day into 24 hours, the hour into 60 minutes. There was the circle divided into 360 degrees. There were laws carved into stone steles, dictating interest rates on grain loans and penalties for broken contracts. There were schools. There were astronomers tracking the movement of Venus with an accuracy that would not be matched for millennia. To the modern historian, this is known as the Sumerian problem. The puzzle of how a civilization appeared so fully formed so abruptly out of the prehistoric silt. To the ancient alien theorist, this is the smoking gun, evidence of external intervention, a technological uplift from a starfaring species. But to the Sumerians themselves there was no puzzle. They simply said it was handed down. They called these gifts the me, pronounced may. The me were not physical objects exactly, though they could be carried. They were divine decrees, blueprints, the fundamental codes of civilization. The gods held the me for kingship, for weaving, for music, for truth, for metallurgy. They were the software packages of society, installed into the human hardware by the Anunnaki. And the greatest of these gifts, the one that truly severed man from the animal, was the wedge. Imagine the silence of the mind before writing. For 200,000 years human thought was a vapour. A genius could have a brilliant idea, but if he died before telling his son, the idea died with him. Memory was a fragile chain, easily broken by fever or war. The past was a fog, the future was a guess. Then, in the shade of a temple courtyard in Uruk, a man sat down with a handful of wet river clay. He smoothed it into a rectangle, a small, cool pillow of earth. In his other hand he held a reed stylus, cut at a sharp angle. He did not draw a picture. Pictures are for children, for hunters. He did something abstract. He pressed the reed into the clay, twisting his wrist. Corner, wedge, line. He made a mark that looked nothing like a cow, yet everyone who looked at it agreed, this is a cow. It was a terrifying kind of magic. He had trapped a physical object inside a piece of mud. He had frozen a thought in time. He could bake this tablet, and 1,000 years later another man could hold it and hear his voice. This invention, cuneiform, was the neural network of the new world. It allowed the city to talk to itself. Suddenly you could manage 10,000 workers. You could track 1,000,000 bushels of barley. You could send an order to a general 500 miles away, and his army would move. The city of Uruk transformed from a village into a machine, humming with the data processing of clay tablets. If this journey through ancient Uruk is helping quiet your mind, a gentle like would help our small community grow. We create these sleep stories with love, and your support means insomniacs like us can find peaceful rest together. Now, let the ancient scribes guide your thoughts deeper into dreams. Stand in the centre of Uruk in your mind's eye. It is no longer the quiet Edin. It is a cacophony of organised purpose. The air is thick with the smoke of kilns, baking the millions of bricks needed for the walls. Walls that stretched for 6 miles, thick enough for a chariot to turn around on top. You hear the grinding of basalt millstones crushing grain, the chanting of priests measuring the stars, the arguments of merchants trading lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan for copper from the Gulf. It feels artificial. It feels constructed. If you were a nomad wandering in from the desert, seeing Uruk for the first time, you would not think humans built this. Humans are soft. Humans are messy. This place is a grid. This place is a circuit board made of mud brick. The Sumerians believed that before the Anunnaki arrived, mankind was like the sheep of the field, drinking from ditches, walking on all fours, knowing nothing of grain or cloth. The arrival of the me, the gifts of civilization, was a domestication event. We were the wild animals, and the gods were the farmers. They built the pen, they taught us to eat from the trough, and they shaved our wool. This brings a strange melancholic texture to the sudden rise. It implies that civilization was not our invention, but our assignment. We didn't discover agriculture. We were put to work. We didn't invent astronomy. We were taught to tell time so we wouldn't be late. There's a cylinder seal from this period that shows a scene of construction. Men are climbing ladders, carrying baskets of bricks. Above them, floating in the air, are the gods. They're holding the measuring rod and the coiled rope, the tools of the architect. They're not lifting the bricks, they're pointing, they're reviewing the blueprints. The alien theory often focuses on lasers and spaceships, but the true alien quality of Sumer is its bureaucracy. It is the sudden imposition of rigid mathematical order on a chaotic organic world. It is the grid placed over the marsh. As the sun sets over the new walls of Uruk, the first lamps are lit, wicks floating in sesame oil. In the scriptorium, the scribes are still at work, their styluses moving like birds pecking at the clay. Click, press, turn. They are recording the inventory of the gods, 10 sheep for Enlil, 5 jars of beer for Inanna. The anomaly is complete. The human species has been upgraded. We have moved from living in the world to managing it. The silence of the hunter-gatherer is gone, replaced by the scratching of reeds and the hum of the city. The Anunnaki have set the machine in motion, and now they have retreated to their high ziggurats to watch it run. But a machine needs a master, a city needs a king, and the gods, busy with their own rivalries in the sky, are about to appoint a middle management to handle the noise of the creatures they have made. The stars wheel overhead, marking the passage of hours that are now counted, minutes that are now measured, over a land that is no longer wild. The Edin has become Sumer, and the long work day of humanity has just begun. Imagine standing in the quiet courtyard of a Sumerian temple, where the gentle smoke of cedar incense drifts through the air, and the soft voices of priests create a peaceful rhythm. In this sacred space, you begin to understand something profound about the nature of order, and how it came to shape the world. The city of Uruk, with its brick walls and granaries, belongs to someone, The people living in it, the baker, the brewer, the bricklayer, are merely staff. They are the tenant farmers of a vast, invisible landlord. When the Sumerians looked up from their ledgers, they did not see a sky filled with random spirits or vague forces. They saw a government. They saw a hierarchy as rigid and defined as the layers of a ziggurat. They called this the Ubshu Ukina, the Divine Assembly. And the beings who sat in this assembly, the Anunnaki, were not poetic metaphors for the wind or the rain. They were the managers of reality. To understand the Anunnaki is to understand the difference between nature and administration. A river is nature. The Anunnaki is the engineer who decides where the river flows. A storm is nature. The Anunnaki is the general who orders the storm to strike a specific city. They were distinct, separate, and terrifyingly organized. At the very top of this high table sat An or Anu. An is the sky, not the atmosphere where the birds fly, but the high, hard dome of the heavens, the space of the stars. In the Sumerian imagination, he is the chairman of the board. He is the father of the gods, but like many founders of great dynasties, he is distant. He rarely comes down to earth. He sits in the highest heaven, clothed in the terrifying radiance the Sumerians called melam, a kind of divine aura or force field that made it impossible for mortals to look at him, and is the ultimate authority, but he is passive. He is the source of the command, but not the voice. He is the silence of deep space. In the ancient alien framework, An is the distant emperor, the one who stays on the mothership or the home world, sending instructions but never dirtying his hands with the mud of earth. Below him, and far more dangerous, sits Enlil. If An is the chairman, Enlil is the chief executive officer. He is the lord of the air, the lord of the command. His seat of power was the city of Nippur, at the temple called the Akur, the mountain house. Enlil is the force that gets things done. He is the energy that separates the earth from the sky. He is the storm that breaks the silence. In the tablets, Enlil is often described with words that evoke fear. His word is unalterable. His command is final. He is the one who draws the maps and sets the boundaries. He is the one who grants kingship to humans, and he is the one who takes it away. There is a cold, efficient pragmatism to Enlil. He is not cruel exactly, but he is precise. He likes order. He likes quiet. He views the human population as a workforce, necessary but easily annoying. If the city becomes too loud, if the humans become too unruly, it is Enlil who signs the executive order for a plague or a flood. He is the embodiment of the state, powerful, necessary, and completely unsentimental. And then, sitting at the third corner of the triangle, there is Enki. If Enlil is the storm in the sky, Enki is the water in the earth. His title, Enki, means Lord of the Earth, but his domain is the Abzu, the deep, sweet, freshwater aquifers that run beneath the soil. His city is Eridu, the oldest city down in the southern marshes where the fresh water meets the salt sea. Enki is the chief engineer. He is the scientist. While Enlil is busy issuing commands and demanding order, Enki is in the mud, figuring out how things work. He is the patron of wisdom, of magic, of crafts. It was Enki who organized the irrigation systems. It was Enki who taught humans how to mold bricks. It was Enki who figured out the secrets of biology and medicine. Enki is different from the others. He is wetter, messier, more approachable. In the myths, he is often depicted with streams of water flowing from his shoulders, filled with leaping fish. He is the trickster, the problem solver, the one who finds the loophole in the contract. If Enlil represents the rigid authority of the alien overlords, Enki represents the curious scientist who falls in love with his experiment. He is the geneticist who lingers in the lab after hours, tinkering with the code. These three, An, Enlil, Enki, formed the supreme triad, but they did not rule alone. They were surrounded by the Anunnaki, the great princely offspring. Imagine them gathered in the assembly. This was not a mystical seance. It was a political meeting. The text described them sitting on thrones, debating, arguing and voting. They decided the fates of cities the way a planning commission decides zoning laws. Shall Ur be destroyed this year? Shall the Tigris flood? Shall we raise a new king in Kish? When they touched a decision, it became Namtar, destiny. To the Sumerians, destiny was not a vague, mystical path. It was a legal decree. Once the Anunnaki voted, the fate was written down, sealed and filed. It was binding law. This bureaucratic view of the cosmos is incredibly soothing in a strange way. It removes the chaos of luck. If a drought came, it wasn't because the universe was random. It was because the assembly had voted for a drought. There was a reason. There was a paperwork trail. But there is a physical aspect to these beings that we cannot ignore, an aspect that feeds the modern alien mythos. In the cylinder seals and the reliefs, the Anunnaki are depicted as human-shaped, but more. They are larger than life. They wear the horned cap, the crown of divinity that marks them as separate from the clay of humanity, and they possess objects. They hold the rod and ring, measuring tools that look suspiciously like technical instruments. They carry buckets and pine cones, performing rituals that look like biological pollinations. They wear wristbands that look like watches. Sitchin and his followers look at these carvings and see pilots and astronauts. They see oxygen masks and control panels. A historian looks at them and sees symbols of authority. The rod is a measuring stick, the ring is a surveyor's tape. But both interpretations agree on one thing. The Anunnaki brought tools. They did not come empty-handed. They came with the equipment to measure, to divide, to build, and to rule. They imposed a grid of logic onto a wild planet. In the sanctuary of the Ikur in Nippur, the priests would set a table for these gods. This was the daily ritual of the care and feeding of the gods. They brought them beef, mutton, bread, beer, fruit and cakes. They laid out fresh clothes. They washed the statues. This sounds like idolatry to us. But strip away the religious language, and what do you see? You see a staff providing room service to a resident elite. You see a workforce maintaining the lifestyle of a leadership class that lives in a secluded high-walled compound. The gods did not work in the fields, the humans did. The gods did not bake the bread, the humans did. The Anunnaki were the management. We were the labour. And for a long time in the golden age of the myths, this system worked. The gods provided the me, the technology, the law, the protection. The humans provided the food and the labour. It was a contract, a covenant. But hierarchies are fragile things. Even in heaven there is resentment. Even among the gods there is a limit to how much work one is willing to do. Wallen sat in the high heaven, and Enlil ruled from his mountain house, and Enki tinkered in the deep water. There was a fourth group, a lower class of gods, the working class deities, the Igigi. They were the ones digging the canals. They were the ones hauling the mud. They were the ones whose backs were breaking under the sun of the Edin. And as the millennia passed, their grumbling grew louder. The corporate structure of heaven was about to face its first union crisis. The stillness of the Sumerian night is deceiving. Above the ziggurat, the stars are orderly and bright, but down in the mud, the tools are heavy, and the strike is coming. History is often written by the winners, but mythology carries the whispers of those who work, those who labour in the depths of time, and deep beneath the golden temples, in the quiet places where ordinary tools touch ordinary earth. A story begins to unfold. To understand this moment, we must turn our attention away from the stars, away from the temples, towards something more humble, more human, down into the brown water of the canal. Here, standing waist-deep in the gentle current, are the Igigi. In the great hierarchy of the Sumerian world, if the Anunnaki were the architects, the Igigi were the builders. They possessed long life, great strength, but their hands were always in the earth. For 40 periods, they worked. They shaped the land, guided the water, made the wilderness breathe. The task before them was nothing less than planetary engineering. The Edin was fertile, but it was wild. To make it habitable for the high gods, the water had to be tamed. The Tigris and Euphrates did not just exist. In the logic of the myth, they had to be dug. Imagine the sheer scale of that labour. We're not talking about a garden hose. We're talking about carving the arteries of a continent. The text known as the Atrahasis describes the work with a brutal, rhythmic simplicity. They dug the canals, they cleared the channels, they heaped up the dikes, they made the land breathe. The atmosphere of this era is not one of divine bliss. It is one of industrial exhaustion. Picture the scene. The sun is a white hammer beating down on the plain. The air is thick with the humidity of the marshes and the smell of wet-turned earth. Thousands of Igigi, their divine bodies coated in the same mud that cakes the boots of modern labourers, are swinging bronze hoes. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythm is hypnotic, but it is the rhythm of suffering. They complain. Of course they complain. The load is excessive, the tablets say. The work is heavy. The misery is much. This is where the alien interpretation gains a surprising amount of traction, simply because the text sounds so eerily modern. It does not read like a mystical chant about spirits dancing in the wind. It reads like a grievance report from a mining colony. It reads like a crew of engineers terraforming a hostile planet, realizing that the timeline is impossible and the Home Office doesn't care. For thousands of years, the Anunnaki in their high temples took the labor for granted. Enlil, in his cool mountain house at Nippur, accepted the grain and the clean water as his due. He was the CEO. Why should he worry about the plumbing? He did not hear the groans from the ditch. He did not see the blisters on the hands that held the shovel. But silence has a limit. The tipping point did not come with a thunderbolt or a grand prophecy. It came, as revolutions often do, in the middle of the night. The text describes the moment with cinematic clarity. The Igigi gather. They're tired, they're dirty, and they're angry. They look at their tools, the heavy baskets, the spades, the picks, and they make a decision. They set fire to their tools. Imagine that sight. In the darkness of the Mesopotamian plain, a bonfire is lit. Into it go the symbols of their servitude. The wood handles crackle and snap. The bronze heads glow red in the heat. It is a supreme act of defiance. They are destroying the means of production. And then they march. This is the first labour strike in recorded history, and it happens to be a strike of the gods. The mob of Igigi, armed not with weapons but with the charred remnants of their tools, heads for the Ikur, the house of Enlil. The description of their approach is terrifyingly human. They do not fly, they walk. They surround the sanctuary. They do not knock. They simply stand there, a ring of angry, silent faces illuminated by torchlight. Inside the house, the reaction is panic. Nusku, the vizier, the chief of staff, wakes Enlil. He is frantic. "My lord, your house is surrounded. The battle has come to your gate." Enlil's reaction is telling. He does not blast them with lightning. He does not dissolve them with a thought. He's frightened. He calls for his weapons. He locks the doors. This is the reaction of a manager who knows he's pushed his staff too far, a governor who realizes the garrison has turned against him. The gods here are not omnipotent beings. They're a ruling class that is suddenly outnumbered. Enlil demands to know who the leader is. "Who declared this war?" he asks. The Igigi reply with a single voice. "Every one of us declared war. We've put a stop to the digging. The load is too heavy. It kills us." This standoff is the pivotal moment of the prehistoric world. It is a deadlock. Enlil wants to crush the rebellion, to execute the ringleaders. He suggests calling Anu down from the sky to authorize a crackdown. He wants to use force, but Enki, the wise counselor, the one who has spent time in the mud, intervenes. He looks at the angry mob, and he looks at the terrified Enlil, and he speaks the truth that breaks the deadlock. "Why do we blame them?" Enki asks. "Their work was heavy. Their distress was much." Enki acknowledges the reality of the situation. The project, the civilization, the irrigation, the city building cannot continue this way. The gods are too few and the work is too great. If they force the Igigi back into the ditches, there will be war. If they do the work themselves, there will be no time for ruling. A solution is needed, a new way forward. This is where the myth pivots from a labour dispute to a Genesis story. The strike of the Igigi creates a vacuum. The canals still need to be dug, the grain still needs to be harvested, but the gods refuse to do it. So, a replacement workforce must be found. The atmosphere shifts from the heat of the bonfire to the cool, dangerous quiet of the laboratory. Enki has an idea. It is a radical, ethically grey, brilliant idea. If the gods will not work, they must build a creature that will. A creature smart enough to understand instructions, strong enough to hold a shovel, but mortal enough to be controlled. The alien theorists look at this moment and see genetic engineering. They see a species designed for servitude. And honestly, the Sumerian text does not contradict them. It does not say humans were created to be loved. It does not say we were created to be children of God in a spiritual sense. It says quite plainly that we were created to carry the basket. We are the scabs who broke the divine strike. Stand back for a moment and feel the weight of that origin story. It is not a story of a garden of bliss where we fell from grace. It is a story of a construction site where the crew walked off the job and we were hired, or rather, manufactured to fill the vacancy. The fires of the Igigi's rebellion burn down to embers. The dawn approaches over the Edin. The canals are silent, half dug, waiting. In the distance the marsh birds call. The strike has worked. The lesser gods have won their freedom. But the work remains. The mud is still there, heavy and wet. And somewhere in the mind of Enki, the blueprint for a new kind of being is taking shape. A being made of the very earth that caused the problem. The tools lie broken in the ashes. The gods retreat to their councils to draft the specifications for the new model. And the silence of the morning is heavy with anticipation. The next sound you hear will not be the voice of a god. It will be the first cry of a human. The quiet that settled after the great work had ceased was not empty silence. It was the peaceful pause between movements, like the gentle hush that falls when a river reaches the sea, or when the wind rests among the reeds. In the worldview of the Anunnaki, silence was expensive. Every hour the tools lay broken in the ash was an hour the Tigris was not dredged, an hour the levees weakened, an hour the chaotic mud of the Edin tried to reclaim the order of the gods. The strike had worked. The rebellion was absolute. Enlil, the executive force, had been checkmated by his own workforce. But the problem of labour remained. The earth would not till itself. the bread would not bake itself. And so, the scene shifts from the riot at the gates of Enlil to a quieter, darker place. We must go to the Bit Shimti, the House of Destiny, the House of Breath. In modern terms, we might call it a laboratory. In the language of the tablets, it was a place where the clay was weighed and the essences were mixed. Enki, the lord of the earth and the patron of fresh water, retreated here with a plan. He summoned Ninhursag, also known as Nintu or Mami, the birth goddess. She was the master of biological form, the potter of the womb. Together they stood over the raw materials of the problem. The solution Enki proposed was radical. It was a synthesis. If the gods were too high to work the soil and the animals were too low to understand instructions, then the answer lay in the middle. They needed a hybrid. They needed a creature that belonged to the earth enough to touch it without revulsion, but belonged to the heavens enough to obey a command. They needed a container made of clay, filled with the ghost of a god. The recipe for this new being is preserved in the Atrahasis epic and other creation texts. It is a set of instructions that reads disturbingly like a chemical formula. First, the hardware, clay. Enki did not choose marble or gold. He chose the mud of the Abzu, the deep, fertile, heavy silt from the edge of the marsh. This was the flesh of the planet. It was abundant, it was malleable, and it was cheap. By choosing clay, Enki ensured that the new creature would always be tied to the physical world. It would get hungry, it would get tired, it would eventually dry out and crumble back into the dust from which it came. Second, the software, blood. Clay alone is just a statue. To make it move, to make it think, to make it fear, it needed a spark. And in the logic of Sumer, that spark could not be created from nothing. It had to be transferred. The law of the universe is exchange. For a new consciousness to be born, an old one had to be extinguished. This is the darkest part of the Anunnaki saga, the part often glossed over in children's books but emphasized by theorists who see a sinister pragmatism in our origins. A god had to die. The council selected a volunteer, or perhaps a scapegoat, from among the rebels. The text calls him Geshtu-e, the god who has intelligence, or sometimes Awilu. He was not a major power like Enlil. He was a lesser deity, but he possessed Tima, personality, memory, the capacity to plan. Imagine the scene in the House of Destiny. It is not a sterile white room with fluorescent lights. It is a humid, torch-lit chamber smelling of copper and wet earth. There is the sound of chanting, which is the rhythmic keeping of time for the procedure. The god Geshtu-e is slaughtered. His blood is drained into a copper vat. Then the mixing begins. Enki and Ninhursag work with their hands. They do not wave wands. They plunge their arms into the mixture of divine blood and river clay. They tread it. The text emphasizes this mixing, the weaving of the two essences. The divine intelligence is bound to the earthly matter. The infinite is trapped inside the finite. This is the moment the ancient alien theory points to as the first genetic experiment. They argue that clay is a metaphor for biological material, for DNA, and that the blood of the god represents the splicing of extraterrestrial genes into a hominid host. They see Enki not as a magician but as a geneticist in a marsh-side clean room, upgrading a primitive stock, Homo erectus, with advanced code. Whether you view it as magic or science, the result is the same, a creature that is fundamentally torn. We are half god, which gives us the ability to do calculus, to write poetry, to look at the stars and recognize our home. And we are half mud, which gives us backaches, hunger, and the inevitability of death. We are a bridge between the Anunnaki and the earth, and bridges are made to be walked on. The creation process continues with industrial precision. Ninhursag does not make just one. She pinches off 14 pieces of the mixed clay. She sets 7 on the right and 7 on the left. 7 males, 7 females. This is mass production. The clay embryos are placed in womb goddesses, surrogates, or perhaps artificial incubators, depending on how literal you want to be with the text. The time is measured, the months are counted. The 10th month arrives. The Sumerian lunar month was slightly different. The womb opens, and the first human opens its eyes. The name the Sumerians gave to this new creature is heartbreakingly descriptive. They did not call us man or human or sapiens. They called us the Sagiga, the black-headed people. It's a description of our physical appearance, yes, the dark hair of the Mesopotamian population. But it is also a designation of status. We are the dark-headed ones, distinct from the shining, horned-crowned gods. We are the ones who look down. The first sound the black-headed people heard was not a lullaby. It was a set of instructions. Enki did not create us to play in a garden. He did not create us to name the animals or to enjoy the sunset. He created us to pick up the tools that the Igigi had burned. You shall bear the load, Enki says to the new creature. You shall carry the basket of the gods. The transition was immediate. The new beings were taken from the house of destiny and marched to the canal banks. The hoe was placed in their hands, the basket was placed on their shoulders, and for the first time in the history of the planet, the work was done without complaint. The genius of Enki's engineering was in the limitations he built into the design. The Igigi rebelled because they were immortal and powerful. They knew they deserved better. The black-headed people did not know better. We were born into labour. We were designed to find satisfaction in a job well done. We were programmed to fear the displeasure of the supervisor, the god, and to be grateful for the ration of grain at the end of the day. It was the perfect workforce, self-replicating, self-repairing, and intelligent enough to solve problems, but not yet intelligent enough to overthrow the masters. Stand on the walls of Uruk a few generations later. The plan has succeeded beyond Enlil's wildest dreams. The canals are straight and deep. The fields of barley stretch to the horizon, a sea of gold feeding the granaries of the temples. The smoke of sacrifices rises from 1,000 altars, the humans feeding the gods who made them. The Anunnaki could finally rest. They retreated to their high chambers at the top of the ziggurats. They became the hidden ones, visible only as statues behind a curtain, audible only as a voice in the heart of the high priest. They let the black-headed people run the machine. But there was a flaw in the design, a ghost in the machine. Remember the ingredient Enki used. He did not use the blood of a sheep or an ox. He used the blood of Geshtu-e, a god who had tima, intelligence, spirit, plans. By putting divine blood into the clay, Enki gave us more than just the ability to follow orders. He gave us the spark of the divine. He gave us the ability to wonder. He gave us the ability to look at the ziggurat and ask, why am I down here, and why are you up there? He gave us the capacity for noise. As the human population exploded, fed by the surplus grain of their own hard labour and the efficient agricultural systems introduced by the Anunnaki, the noise of humanity began to rise from the Edin. This was not the gentle murmur of a river or the rustle of wind through the reeds. It was a cacophony. It was not just the noise of voices shouting across bustling marketplaces. It was the rhythmic, relentless clang of smiths hammering copper, the celebratory din of festivals, the mournful cries of loss, and the sharp, anxious sound of quarrel and ambition. It was the sound of a teeming, complex, and rapidly expanding life, being lived loudly and without deference to the silent order of the sky gods. To Enlil, The commander of the Earth mission sitting in the pristine mountain-hewn silence of his command center, this noise was not the harmonious sound of a thriving civilization he'd reluctantly permitted. It was an intolerable disturbance. It was the hum of a malfunctioning appliance about to short-circuit, a persistent, distinct, low-frequency vibration against his highly evolved senses. It was the screech of a machine running too hot, its gears seizing up under the stress of uncontrolled exponential growth. The black-headed people, his term for the genetically engineered Homo sapiens, were becoming too numerous, their settlements sprawling into unplanned urban centres. They were too loud, their constant clamour a physical affront to the divine stillness. And perhaps, most dangerously, they were beginning to exhibit flickers of the consciousness, the creativity and the self-will that was too much like the gods whose essence, whose very blood they carried within their veins. The engineering project, the creation of a compliant, durable workforce, had been an unqualified success in terms of labour output. But the maintenance and control of the resultant species was rapidly becoming a nightmare. The alien overlords, gazing down from their swift-moving observation vessels and their ziggurat towers, looked upon the vast, teeming cities of the plain, Eridu, Uruk, Shurapak, and realized with growing dread that they had created something far more vital and unpredictable than simple servants. They had wanted mere tools for mining gold and farming grain. They had created a species that was slowly, unconsciously, remembering its own inherent, half-forgotten divinity. Their creation was beginning to think for itself, to plan beyond its immediate servitude, and to question the unspoken rules of its existence. And so, in the high, sombre council chamber of the Anunnaki, where the air was thick with the sterile scent of advanced technology and cold logic, a new, terrible motion was tabled. Enlil presented the data, the population curves, the energy consumption, the rising incidence of civil disobedience, the sheer unbearable volume of the human din. The experiment, he declared, was violently drifting out of its established parameters. The contamination was spreading. A hard, definitive reset was required to secure the integrity of the mission and the continued silent authority of the gods. Only a catastrophic event could wipe the slate clean and restore the necessary silence. The atmosphere above the vast, fertile plain of Mesopotamia, particularly over the city of Shurapak, began to darken with an unnatural swiftness. The subtle electromagnetic frequencies of the air began to shift. The winds, normally predictable and dry, began to moan with a deep, unsettling resonance. The black-headed people, busy with their hoes in the communal fields, haggling in the marketplaces over baskets of grain, and tending to the overwhelming demands of their burgeoning families, did not notice the profound, ominous change in the weather. They were too preoccupied with the noise of their own lives. They did not know that the managers of the planet had decided, with cold finality, to close the factory, to dismantle the noisy product, and to prepare the site for a new, quieter beginning. The water was coming, a wall of silence and annihilation, engineered by the very gods they unknowingly served. The great work had flourished beyond all expectations. Enki's gentle creation, the black-headed people, had found their purpose with grace. They had learned the tools of the earth. They had opened the channels of water. They had grown in number. But the abundance of life is a force as vast as the ocean itself. Once lit, it burns through the fuel of the land with a ferocity that even the gods had not anticipated. The text described the crisis not as a sin, but as a noise. The land extended, the Atrahasis epic records. The people multiplied. The land was bellowing like a bull. To Enlil, the the chief executive sitting in the high silence of Nippur. This was not the sound of life. It was the sound of signal interference. The humans were becoming too numerous, too loud and too chaotic. Their noise disturbed his sleep. In the bureaucratic logic of the Anunnaki, this noise was likely more than just volume. It was disorder. It was the friction of a machine running out of tolerance. The workforce had outgrown the factory. The Council of Heaven convened again. The mood was grim. They had tried smaller corrections, plagues, famines, droughts. Each time Enki, the sympathetic engineer, had taught the humans how to survive, how to store grain, how to filter water. The population bounced back, louder than before. So Enlil proposed the final solution, a total system wipe, a deluge. They would not just send rain, they would unmake the world. They would remove the barrier between the waters above, the sky, and the waters below, the abyss. They would return the Edin to the state of primeval mud, and crucially, they swore an oath of silence. No warning was to be given to the livestock, but Enki, the lord of the earth, could not let his creation perish. He was bound by the oath not to speak to any human, so he found a technical loophole. He did not speak to a man, he spoke to a house. In the city of Shuruppak there lived a king named Zeusudra, or Utnapishtim, or Atrahasis. He was a wise man, a devotee of Enki. One night as he slept in his reed hut, a voice came not from the air, but from the wall itself. The wind whispered through the woven reeds, carrying a frequency that vibrated in the king's bones. "Wall, listen to me," the voice said. "Reed hut, pay attention. Tear down the house, build a boat, abandon wealth, seek life." The instructions that followed were not for a raft, they were for a survival capsule. The ancient alien theory often fixates on the design of this vessel. In the oldest tablets, the boat is not described as a pointed ship meant to cut through waves. It is described as a cube, or a circular coracle sealed on all sides. It is a magan boat, a term usually reserved for the heavy, deep-draft cargo ships that brought copper from Oman. But the most critical detail is the sealant. Pitch, the Bible calls it. Bitumen, the Sumerians called it. Bitumen is the black blood of the Iraqi earth. It bubbles up from the ground in sticky, tar-like pools. It is the smell of freshly paved roads, ancient and industrial. Enki instructed Zeusudra to boil this tar and coat the vessel inside and out. He was to make it watertight. He was to seal the door. This was not a boat to sail upon the water. It was a boat to survive under the water. It was a submersible, a sealed biosphere designed to ride out a planetary convulsion. Zeusudra worked in a frenzy. He told his neighbours a cover story, a lie suggested by Enki, that he was leaving the city to go live with his god in the marshes. He loaded the capsule with the seed of all living things, a phrase that could mean a zoo of animals, or if you prefer the technological lens, a genetic bank. He sealed his family inside, and then the Anunnaki pulled the lever. The description of the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the most terrifying passages in literature, because it describes the terror of the gods themselves. This was not a natural storm. It was a weaponized event. The dikes of the heavens were opened, the text says. The Anunnaki lifted up their torches, setting the land ablaze with their glare. The sky turned black. The wind smashed the land like a clay pot. The water did not just fall, it exploded from the aquifers. The sheer violence of the event stunned the very beings who had ordered it. The tablet tells us that the gods retreated to the highest heaven of Anu, their celestial command centre. They huddled against the wall of the sky, cowering like dogs, a deeply humiliating posture for beings who had demanded worship. Ishtar, the great goddess of love and war, screamed like a woman in the throes of labour, her anguish palpable. She lamented the catastrophic decision, regretting that she had ever agreed to the complete and utter destruction of her own beloved human creations. This is a profound and intensely dramatic moment of divine vulnerability. The technologically advanced alien overlords, who considered themselves masters of creation and the ultimate authority, had unleashed a force, the Great Deluge, that proved to be an elemental power they could barely control, let alone withstand. They sat petrified in their high-orbit craft, or perhaps within their impenetrable mountain sanctuary. The text allows for both interpretations, watching the planet below them transform into a churning, chaotic ocean of mud and debris. The incessant, bustling noise of humanity, which had become so irritating to the high god Enlil, was finally gone, replaced by the terrifying, all-encompassing silence of a drowned, dead world. Inside the small, confined capsule, the Ark, which was now tumbling randomly in the dark, suffocating void of the storm, smelling intensely of hot tar sealant and raw fear, Ziusudra, the designated survivor, waited. He was more than just a man. He was the backup drive, the essential data carried safely through the system-wide fire, the single seed of humanity preserved for the future. For 6 long days and 7 terrifying nights, the unprecedented storm raged across the face of the earth. Then, as abruptly as it began, the tumultuous sea grew calm. The destructive wind of the deluge finally ceased its howling. Ziusudra cautiously opened a hatch, a small window to the newly visible sky, and felt the unexpected warmth of the returning sun on his face. He looked out upon the desolation. All was silence, he would later recall. All mankind had turned to clay. The cosmic reset was complete. The grand machine of human civilization had been violently turned off and was now prepared to be turned back on again. But as the churning waters receded, draining back into the newly shaped oceans, and the Ark finally grounded firmly on the high, isolated peaks of the north, a new and utterly unexpected problem arose. A problem that struck at the very core of the Anunnaki's divine existence. The gods were starving. In their monumental arrogance, their absolute focus on silencing the human noise, the Anunnaki had completely forgotten a key non-negotiable part of the established cosmic economy. They had annihilated their entire labour force. Consequently, there was no one left to mill the grain and bake the sacred bread. There was no one to ferment the barley and pour the required beer libations. Most critically, there was no one to tend the fires and burn the aromatic incense that rose in sweet plumes to the heavens as the essential food for the divine beings. When Ziusudra finally stepped out of the protective capsule and with practiced hands lit a fire to roast an offering of meat and grain, the potent savoury smell drifted up, a siren call to the waiting sky. The gods, desperate and famished, immediately smelled the sweet savour of the sacrifice. The tablet records the profoundly humbling detail. They gathered like flies around the smoke column and the sacrificial offering. It is a grotesque, deeply ironic and profoundly humble image of the divine. The mighty Anunnaki, the great ones who wielded the power to unleash global destruction, were now starving and regretful, shamelessly crowding around the first simple campfire of the new world. In that moment of raw hunger, they were forced to confront a brutal truth. They needed humanity, their labourers, their servants, their priests, just as much as, or perhaps even more than, humanity needed them. The contract between God and man was therefore immediately renegotiated. Enlil, the god who demanded the flood, was predictably furious that a human had managed to survive his decree. but the diplomatic and cunning Enki smoothed the situation over. They agreed that humans could indeed continue to exist and multiply, but only under severe new limitations designed to prevent a future noise problem. These limitations included drastically shorter lifespans, the introduction of widespread infant mortality, and various social and biological barriers to unmanaged population growth. The noise would henceforth be strictly managed and controlled, not permanently silenced. Slowly, the floodwaters drained away into the Persian Gulf. The vast expanses of mud dried and hardened into fertile ground. The great ziggurats, the communication towers of the gods, were eventually rebuilt. But the relationship between creator and created had been irrevocably changed. The gods no longer walked openly among men as physical foremen, overseers and teachers. They retreated into the distant heavens and the high mountain sanctuaries. They became more abstract, more remote. To effectively manage this new, fragile world, and to ensure their tribute economy was never again interrupted, the Anunnaki introduced a new administrative technology. They introduced the institution of the state, establishing the concept of divine kingship and centralized control, ensuring order and labor mobilization through human intermediaries. After the great waters had returned to their place, the world lay in gentle stillness. The great cities rested like sleeping giants beneath the soft earth. A new beginning was calling, but the divine ones had learned the wisdom of gentle guidance. The strike of the Igigi and the trauma of the flood had proven that micromanagement was a disaster. They needed a middleman. They needed a buffer between the divine council and the human workforce. And so, the Sumerian king list records a singular event with a dry, bureaucratic phrase, Namlugalanta Edde, the kingship was lowered from heaven. Notice the phrasing. Kingship was not invented by men. It was not a reward for the strongest warrior. It was an object, a tool, a heavy piece of furniture lowered from the sky on a rope. It was a franchise package. The first city to receive this franchise after the flood was Kish. The Anunnaki handed over the me of governance. In the artistic reliefs of this period, we see exactly what this transfer looked like. The god sits on a throne. The human king stands before him, hand raised in respect, and the god hands him two objects, the rod and the ring. Scholars call these measuring tools, a yardstick and a coil of rope for surveying fields, and they are. But in the ancient alien context, they look like something more. The rod is the tool of straight lines, of law, of the vertical axis connecting earth to sky. The ring is the tool of cycles, of time, of the horizon. Together, they are the instruments of order. By handing them to a human, the Anunnaki were saying, here, you measure the fields, you count the grain, you keep the peace. We will watch from the ziggurat. This was the birth of the divine right of kings, but in Sumer it was the divine burden of kings. The king was not a god. He was the Lugal, the big man. He was the foreman. If the canal silted up, the god didn't get angry at the people, he got angry at the king. The Sumerian king list, a prism-shaped clay document, tracks these early rulers, and this document is the source of endless fascination for those looking for extraterrestrial footprints, because the numbers don't add up. The list begins in the mists before the flood. When kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. Enmenlu-Anna ruled for 43,200 years. The list goes on. 8 kings ruling for a total of 241,200 years. Then the flood sweeps over. After the flood, the rains drop. They're still long, 1,200 years, 900 years, but they are shrinking. Eventually, by the time we get to Gilgamesh and the historical kings of Uruk, the numbers settle into distinct human lifespans of 30 or 40 years. What are we to make of this data? The standard historical view is that the early numbers are symbolic, representing the immense prestige of the ancient past. A year might mean a season or a day, or simply a very long time. But the alien theorist looks at the data as a biological log. They suggest that the pre-flood kings were not human. They were Anunnaki, or direct demigod hybrids, whose biology was tuned to the slow cycles of their homeworld, or who possessed the technology of longevity. As the generations passed, and the blood of the god became diluted by the clay of the earth, the lifespan degraded. The genetic signal faded. The atmosphere of Earth, perhaps different after the cataclysm of the flood, was no longer conducive to immortality. We were becoming more mud, less sky. The era of the Kingship marked a profound psychological shift. The gods were no longer neighbours. They were landlords who lived in the penthouse. The city became the property of the deity. Nippur belonged to Enlil. Ur belonged to Nanna, the moon. Uruk belonged to Inanna. The king was merely the steward. He built the god a house, the temple. He fed the god meals, the sacrifices. He clothed the god, the vestments. In return, the god offered protection. This was the protection racket of the ancient world. If you fed the god, he wouldn't send a plague. If you repaired his roof, he wouldn't let the Elamites burn your city. It was a cold transactional arrangement, and it was centered on the ziggurat. The ziggurat was not a tomb like a pyramid. It was a machine for contact. It was a staircase. At the top sat the Gigunu, the residence of the god when he chose to descend. Only the high priest could enter. It was the airlock between the human dimension and the divine dimension. As the centuries of the third millennium wore on, the silence of the gods grew deeper. They stopped speaking to walls. They stopped gathering like flies. They spoke only through omens, through the liver of a sheep, the movement of smoke, the position of Venus. The king became the interpreter. He stood on the ziggurat, rod and ring in hand, squinting at the sky, trying to remember the instructions given eons ago. The Anunnaki had left the building, leaving the franchise in human hands, but they left one final terrifying check on human power. They kept the tablet of Destinies, and every year during the New Year festival, the king had to be stripped of his regalia, slapped in the face by the high priest, and forced to beg for his renewal. It was a yearly reminder. You do not own this. You're just renting it. The grid was re-established. The cities of Sumer rose from the mud, higher and more complex than before. But something was missing. The intimacy of the marsh was gone. The humans were now alone with their kings, working the fields under the watchful, silent gaze of the stars. The machine was running perfectly. But the engineers had gone home. To understand the complete wisdom of the Anunnaki, we must not only gaze up at the dance of the stars, we must also look down into the peaceful depths of the earth. The Sumerian cosmos was a realm of gentle layers. Above was the An, the great dome of the sky, the jurisdiction of the chairman, Anu. In the middle was the key, the earth, the manufacturing floor where the black-headed people laboured under the watch of Enlil. But beneath the deepest roots of the mountains, beneath the sweet water aquifers of Enki's Abzu, lay a third realm. They called it the Kur, the land of no return, the Akala. Modern religions paint the underworld as a place of moral judgment, of fire and punishment. But the Sumerians were pragmatists, even in death. Their underworld was not a furnace, it was a cellar. It was a dusty, sunless archive where life was stored after it had ceased to be useful. It was a place of clay and silence, ruled by a bureaucracy as rigid and unforgiving as the stars above. The queen of this realm was Ereshkigal, the older sister of Inanna. If Inanna was the goddess of the morning star, of ambition and love and war, the high-frequency energy of the cosmos, then Ereshkigal was the ground wire. She was entropy. She was the force that slows things down until they stop. The story of Inanna's descent is perhaps the most famous of all Sumerian myths, and for the ancient alien theorist, it is the most technically revealing. It reads less like a spiritual journey and more like a security protocol. It is the story of a high-ranking operator attempting to enter a restricted facility and being systematically disarmed. The atmosphere of this segment is claustrophobic. We are leaving the wide, windy plains of the Edin. We're entering a tunnel that smells of dry earth and stale air. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, decides she wants to visit the great below. Her motives are never entirely clear, perhaps ambition, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a hostile takeover. But she knows the danger. She knows that the Kur is a place where the rules of the sky do not apply. Before she leaves, she prepares. She does not pray, she gears up. The text is meticulous about what she wears. She puts on the shugura, the crown of the steppe. She puts on the lapis lazuli beads around her neck. She puts on the golden ring, the breastplate, the palarobe of ladyship. In the traditional view, this is a queen dressing for a state visit. But in the context of the Anunnaki as a technologically advanced civilization, look closer at the items. She is equipping herself with the me. The me, pronounced May, are the divine powers, the software of the gods, but they are physically embodied in objects. Is the Shugura crown merely a hat? Or is it a communication array, a receiver that keeps her connected to the network of heaven? Is the lapis necklace just jewellery, or is it a data storage drive containing the codes of her authority? Is the breastplate armour, or is it a shielding unit? Inanna dresses like a soldier putting on Kevlar and night vision goggles. She tells her vizier, Ninshuba, to set a timer. "If I do not return in 3 days," she says, "trigger the alarm, alert the assembly, do not let me be deleted." She descends, she arrives at the gate of the Kur, the palace of Ganzir. This is the threshold. The atmosphere here is heavy. The air pressure changes. The light of the sun is gone, replaced by a dull subterranean gloom. She knocks on the door. "Open the house, gatekeeper," she commands. "Open the house, Nettie, or I will smash the door and shatter the bolt." Nettie, the chief security officer of the underworld, does not open. He follows protocol. He asks for identification. "Who are you?" "I am Inanna, Queen of Heaven, on my way to the east." Nettie tells her to wait. He goes inside to consult with the CEO, Ereshkigal. When Ereshkigal hears that her sister, the bright star of the upper atmosphere, is banging on the blast doors, she is not pleased. She bites her lip. The text says her face turns dark like the cut-down tamarisk. She knows this is an intrusion. "Let her in," Ereshkigal orders, "but treat her according to the ancient rites. Close the 7 gates behind her, and at each gate strip her." This is the security protocol of the underworld. It is a decontamination process. It is a deactivation sequence. The descent begins. The first gate. Nettie opens the outer door. The hinges groan, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. Inanna steps across the threshold. The air is cold. Nettie stops her. "My lady," he says, "the crown must go." Inanna protests. "Why? This is the crown of the steppe. It is my signal." "Quiet, Inanna," Nettie says. "The ways of the underworld are perfect. Do not question them." She hands over the shugura. Imagine the moment. She takes off the heavy, golden helmet. Immediately, the connection to the upper world is severed. The static in her mind clears, replaced by a ringing silence. She is no longer receiving data from the sky. She's just a woman standing in a cave. The gate slams shut behind her. The second gate. She walks deeper. The tunnel slopes downward. The dust on the floor is thick, muffling her footsteps. Nettie stops her again. The earrings, he says, the measuring rods of lapis lazuli. She unclasps them. These are the sensors, the tools of judgment. Without them, she cannot hear the frequencies of the gods. Her hearing becomes human, limited to the echo of her own breath. The gate slams shut, the third gate. The air grows stale. The darkness presses against her eyes. The necklace, Nettie says, the small lapis beads. She removes the necklace. If this held the me, the programs of her power, she is now losing her memory, her access codes. She feels lighter, but also smaller. The authority of the sky is being stripped away bite by bite. The gate slams shut. The fourth gate. The tunnel narrows. The walls are rough, unfinished stone. The breastplate, Nettie says. The come man come stones. She unbuckles the heavy plate. This was her shielding, her protection against radiation, against weapons, against the gaze of others. Now her heart is exposed. She shivers. The climate control of the suit is gone. The chill of the grave seeps into her skin. The gate slams shut. The fifth gate. She's walking slower now. The arrogance is draining out of her. The gold ring, Nettie says. The grip of the hand. She slides the ring from her finger. The ring, the symbol of the franchise, the tool of the architect. Without it, she cannot build, she cannot command, she cannot shape the geometry of the world. She's lost her admin privileges. The gate slams shut. The sixth gate. She can see the dim light of the inner sanctum ahead, but the path is blocked. The pectoral, Nettie says, the rod of measurement. She hands over the sceptre, the weapon, the force multiplier. Now she is unarmed. She has no reach. She is physically vulnerable in a way an Anunnaki should never be. The gate slams shut. The seventh gate. She stands before the final throne room. She is almost naked, shivering, stripped of every piece of technology that defined her divinity. The pala robe, Nettie says, the garment of ladyship. She drops the robe. She enters the throne room of Ereshkigal naked. This image, the naked goddess, is profound. In the ancient alien context, this is the pilot stepping out of the cockpit. This is the astronaut without the suit. Without the me, without the tech, without the connection to the network. Inanna is just biological matter. She is no different from the human she rules. The superiority of the Anunnaki was not in their souls, it was in their gear. And down here, in the Faraday cage of the Kur, the gear doesn't work. Ereshkigal sits on her throne. She does not look like a sister, she looks like a monolith. She's surrounded by the 7 judges of the underworld, the Anunnaki of the deep. In the upper world, the Anunnaki are the council of architects. Down here, they are the jury. They look at Inanna. They do not offer her a chair. They fasten their eyes of death upon her. The text describes this weapon with horrifying simplicity. It is a gaze that dismantles. It is a ray that stops biology. She spoke against her the word of wrath, the tablet says. She uttered against her the cry of guilt. She struck her. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, turns into a corpse. The text says she was turned into a slab of meat and hung on a hook on the wall. Pause here. Let the image sink in. The most powerful entity in the Sumerian pantheon, the woman who stole the me from Enki, the woman who commanded kings, has been reduced to a piece of rotting protein. It is a statement of absolute materialism. The gods are not spirits, they are bodies, and bodies can be switched off. The silence of the underworld is absolute. Inanna hangs on the hook. Green dust settles on her skin. She has become part of the inventory of Ereshkigal. This segment of the myth serves as a grim reminder of the limits of the Anunnaki power. They were masters of the sky and the earth. But the deep was a different jurisdiction with different physics. It suggests that their power was dependent on their environment, on their tools, on their hierarchy. Strip that away, and they die just like the black-headed people. But the story does not end with death. The Anunnaki have one technology that humans do not, the backup drive. Up in the world of light, the timer runs out. Ninshuba, the faithful vizier, realizes the alarm has tripped. She initiates the rescue protocol. She goes to Enlil. He refuses to help. He follows the rules. If you go to the Kur, you stay in the Kur. She goes to Nana. He refuses. Finally, she goes to Enki. Enki, the scientist, the hacker. He does not panic. He checks his fingernails. From the dirt under his fingernails, from the very DNA of the crater, he fashions two strange creatures, the Kagara and the Galatur. These are sexless biological drones. They're small enough to slip through the cracks of the gates. They are not alive in the traditional sense, so the eyes of death cannot stop them. They are special ops. Enki gives them the food of life and the water of life. He sends them down. They fly through the tunnels, past the 7 gates into the throne room. They find Ereshkigal groaning in pain. She is in labour, birthing the consequences of death. They comfort her. They trick her. And in gratitude she offers them a gift. "Give us the slab of meat that hangs on the hook," they say. They take the green, lifeless body of Inanna. They sprinkle the food of life. They sprinkle the water of life. The technology of resuscitation is activated. Inanna gasps. The biology restarts. She rises from the hook. But the bureaucracy of the underworld is strict. No one leaves the Kur without a substitute, the judges say. The ledger must be balanced, a life for a life. Inanna ascends, passing back through the 7 gates. At each gate her gear is returned. The robe, the rod, the ring, the breastplate, the necklace, the earrings, the crown. As she reconnects each piece, the power returns, the static clears, the aura of Melam ignites around her shoulders. She's no longer the naked refugee. She's the Queen of Heaven once more. But she is followed by the Gala demons, the enforcers of the deep. They're waiting for her to choose a substitute. Who will die so that she may live? She returns to her city, Uruk. She finds her husband, Dumuzi, sitting on her throne, wearing her robes, enjoying her power. He is not mourning her. He's celebrating her absence. The choice is made. The cold, pragmatic logic of the Anunnaki asserts itself. "Take him," she says to the demons. The segment ends with the shadow of the Kur reaching up to claim the king. The descent has proven that even the gods are subject to the laws of the machine. They can be deactivated, and they can be rebooted, but the cost of the energy transfer must always be paid. We leave Inanna standing in the sunlight, fully armoured, fully operational, but with the dust of the grave still clinging to the hem of her robe. She has seen the basement of the universe. She knows now that the power of the sky is a fragile thing, dependent on the crown upon her head, and she knows that in the dark everyone looks the same. We have walked the gentle earth of the Edin, where the black-headed people were shaped with love from sacred clay to tend the garden. We have floated in the peaceful darkness of the great vessel while the world was renewed. We have descended into the quiet chambers of the Kur. where even the Queen of Heaven found gentle transformation in the wisdom of the deep. Now we must ascend. We must leave the damp earth and the heavy air behind and climb the brick stairs of the ziggurat up to the highest point in the city of Nippur, to the sanctuary known as the Duranki, the bond of heaven and earth. Here the air is thin and smells of nothing but ozone and ancient dust. The noise of the human city below is gone. There is only the hum of the wind passing through the high fenestrations of the temple. In this room, there is no statue of a god to be fed. There is only a seat, and on that seat, or perhaps held in a chest of cedar and bronze, lies the object that makes the entire machine run. It is small, it is square, it is made of lapis lazuli, blue as the deepest ocean, flecked with pyrite gold like the stars of the night sky. It is the Tup-Shimati, the tablet of Destinies. To the uninitiated eye, it looks like a piece of stone covered in wedge-shaped marks. But in the ancient alien framework, and indeed in the logic of the Sumerian texts themselves, this object is not a symbol of power. It is power. It is the hard drive of the universe. It is the motherboard that holds the operating system of civilization. The Sumerians believed that the world did not function by accident. The sun did not rise because it wanted to. It rose because it was commanded. The rivers did not flow because of gravity. They flowed because they were assigned a course. Everything, from the orbit of Jupiter to the yield of a barley field, was governed by a divine decree. And all those decrees were compiled, indexed, and activated by the tablet. Whoever held the tablet did not need to be strong. They did not need to be wise. They did not even need to be a god. They simply needed to hold the device. Possession was 100% of the law. If you held the tablet, you had admin access. You could rewrite the code of the cosmos. You could look at a king and say die, and his biology would cease. You could look at a river and say dry up, and the water would vanish. It was the ultimate weapon and the ultimate responsibility. For eons the tablet rested safely in the hands of Enlil. He wore it on his chest, a square of blue fire against his robes. It was the badge of his office as CEO. As long as Enlil held it, the hierarchy held. The Anunnaki obeyed him, the Igigi obeyed the Anunnaki, and the humans obeyed the Igigi. The chain of command was secure, but security breeds complacency, and even the gods are prone to the error of trusting the wrong employee. The guardian of the sanctuary, the being entrusted to stand at the door and watch over the tablet while Enlil slept, was Anzu. In the myths, Anzu is described as a bird, a massive, terrifying storm bird with the head of a lion and wings that could blot out the sun. But look closer at the description. Anzu is a creature of metal and wind. His roar shakes the mountains. His feathers are described as sharp. He is a being of the air, capable of flight, capable of immense destruction. But he's not one of the high gods. He is a servant. He is a sentry. In the modern retelling, Anzu is the drone. He's the automated defense system, or perhaps the pilot of the craft that guards the command center. He is a biological machine designed for security, programmed to be loyal. But as we learned with the black-headed people, anything that has intelligence eventually develops ambition. Day after day, Anzu stood at the door of the Duranki. Day after day, he watched Enlil. He watched the great god take off his crown. He watched him lay aside his weapons, and most crucially, he watched him take off the tablet. The text is very specific about the moment of vulnerability. It happens when Enlil is bathing. The god removes the tablet of Destinies and places it on a bench so he can enter the pure water of the bath. It is a moment of mundane physical necessity. Even a god must wash. Even a CEO must take a shower. Anzu watches. He sees the blue stone sitting there unguarded, and a thought, a glitch in his programming enters his mind. The text says he gazed at the insignia of Enlilship. He gazed at the tablet of Destinies. His heart was carried away. He resolved to steal the myth. Note the word myth here. In Sumerian, myth means command or power. He resolved to steal the operating system. I will take the tablet of Destinies, Anzu thinks. I will govern the decrees of the gods. I will establish my own throne. I will turn the Igigi against their masters. It is the classic coup, the security chief deciding he should be the president. He waits for the splash of the water. He waits for Enlil to close his eyes. And then, with a rush of wind and the sound of a hurricane, Anzu strikes. He does not fight Enlil. He simply snatches the tablet. Before the wet and naked Enlil can shout, Anzu is gone. He launches himself into the sky, flying towards the mountain of safety, a remote fortress where he can plug the tablet in and begin his reign. The immediate consequence of the theft is terrifying. It is not a war. It is a system crash. The text says the formulas were suspended, the stillness spread, the silence prevailed, the sanctuary lost its brilliance. This is the blue screen of death for the Mesopotamian universe. Without the tablet broadcasting the protocols of the cosmos stop running. The sun might still hang in the sky, but the authority of the sun is gone. The Anunnaki, sitting in their council, suddenly feel their power drain away. Their commands no longer work. They open their mouths to speak, but reality does not obey. Enlil, wrapping himself in a towel, stands in the centre of the silent temple. He is no longer the king of the universe. He's just an old man in a bathhouse. The hierarchy has been decapitated. Panic spreads through the assembly of the gods. They gather, but they are leaderless. They need a hero. They need someone to go to the mountain, defeat the rogue drone, and retrieve the hard drive. But who can fight Anzu? He holds the tablet. He controls the code. If you attack him, he can simply edit your destiny to read deceased. Adad, the storm god, is asked to go. He refuses. Who can rush against Anzu, he asks. He holds the tablet. His command is unalterable. Shara, the fire god, is asked. He refuses. The gods are paralyzed by the very technology they created. Finally, a champion is found. It is Ninurta, or Ningirsu in some versions. He is the son of Enlil, the warrior, the hunter. He is the god of the south wind, the wet storm. He is young, brave, and perhaps foolish enough to try. He arms himself. He takes the 7 winds. He takes the thunderbolt. He takes his bow, and he flies to the mountain where Anzu is hiding. The battle that follows is one of the most science fiction sequences in all of ancient mythology. It is not a sword fight. It is a battle of reality distortion. Ninurta arrives at the mountain. He shouts a challenge. Anzu flies out to meet him, the tablet of Destinies glowing on his chest. Ninurta draws his bow. He nocks an arrow. He fires. The arrow flies straight and true, aiming for the heart of the bird. But Anzu does not dodge. He touches the tablet. He executes a command. Arrow, Anzu says, return to your thicket. Bowstring, return to the sheep's gut. Shaft, return to the wood. He commands the arrow to reverse its history. This is not a shield. This is entropy reversal. The arrow stops in midair. It flies backward. The feathers detach and fly away to become birds. The wood of the shaft uncarves itself and flies back to the forest to become a tree. The string untwists and returns to the animal. The weapon is unmade before it can strike. Ninurta is helpless. How can you fight an enemy who can hit undo on your attacks? He fires again and again, and each time the tablet rewrites the timeline of the weapon. The arrows dissolve into raw materials. The Anunnaki, watching from afar, are in despair. The system is locked. The hacker has won, but Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, is watching too. Enki, who understands the code because he helped write it. He sends a message to Ninurta, a telepathic whisper in the heat of battle. He tells Ninurta that he cannot win with force. He must hack the hacker. Do not aim for the bird, Enki advises. Aim for the feathers. The strategy is complex and relies on the mechanics of the wind. Enki tells Ninurta to cut the feathers of Anzu's wings with a wind blade. When the feathers are cut, Anzu will try to command them to return, just as he commanded the arrows. Feathers, return, Anzu will shout. And in that split second when the command is issued for things to return, Ninurta must fire his arrow behind the command. The tablet will be busy processing the return function. Ninurta follows the advice. He slashes the air with the south wind. Anzu's wing feathers are sheared off. They float in the air. Anzu, acting on instinct and arrogance, shouts, "Feathers, return!" The tablet activates. It pulls the feathers back, but the command, "return," is a blanket command. It pulls everything back. Ninurta fires his arrow. The arrow is caught in the tractor beam of the return command. It is pulled forward, faster than before, riding the slipstream of the tablet's own power. It does not reverse, it accelerates. It strikes Anzu in the chest. It pierces the heart. The tablet cannot distinguish between the feathers returning to the wing and the arrow returning to the target. The logic loop is closed. Anzu falls. The great stormbird crashes into the mountain. The tablet of Destinies falls from his grasp. Ninurta stands over the fallen sentry. He picks up the square of lapis lazuli. It is heavy, warm to the touch. For a moment he holds the universe in his hand. The temptation to keep it, to become the new CEO, must have been overwhelming. He could rewrite the war. He could rewrite his own rank. But Ninurta is a loyal son. He flies back to Nippur. He walks into the silent sanctuary where his father, Enlil, is waiting. He hands the tablet back. Enlil places it around his neck. The hum returns. The silence breaks. The commands of Enlil are broadcast once more. The sun resumes its proper motion. The rivers remember which way to flow. The system is rebooted. The crisis of the Anzu bird is over. But the lesson remains, etched into the clay of the myth, for every generation to read. The lesson is vulnerability. The Anunnaki were not mystical spirits of infinite capacity. They were operators of a machine, and that machine had a single point of failure. A single piece of hardware stolen by a disgruntled guard was enough to bring the entire hierarchy of heaven crashing down. It demystifies the gods in a profound way. It suggests that their power was external, technological, and transferable. It wasn't in their blood, it was in their tools. Without the tablet, Enlil was just a naked bather. With the tablet, Anzu the bird was the king of the universe. This story resonates with the ancient alien narrative not because it proves the existence of spaceships, but because it perfectly describes a technological society. It describes a world where power is codes, keys, and access. A world where a system crash is more dangerous than a war. As we leave the high sanctuary of the Duran Key, the wind is blowing again. The Anunnaki are back on their thrones. The black-headed people are back to their labour, unaware of how close the universe came to crashing. The machine is running smooth and quiet. But now we know. We know that the gods are not safe. We know that the destiny of the world is a small blue stone that can be stolen. And we know that somewhere in the mountains, the feathers of the Anzu bird are still scattered. A reminder that even the absolute software of the cosmos can be hacked. We descend the steps of the ziggurat, leaving the thin air of the gods, returning to the heavy, comforting mud of the plain. The night is deep. The stars are watching. but they look different now. They look less like eyes and more like the lights on a control panel blinking in the dark. The tablets rested in peaceful silence. After the passing of Babylon, after the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans had walked through the land between the rivers, the great libraries of the Anunnaki found their rest beneath the gentle earth. The great temples, once the stairways to heaven, returned to peaceful mounds of earth. The canals choked with silt. The names of Enlil and Enki were forgotten, replaced by newer gods, and then by the one god. For 2,000 years the Anunnaki slept. They did not sleep in the sky. They slept in the dark, buried beneath the sand of Iraq. The clay tablets, baked in the fires of ancient destructions, lay stacked in the ruins of Nineveh and Nippur, waiting. They were a time capsule, a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time. In the 19th century the bottle was opened. European archaeologists digging in the mounds of Mosul found the library of Ashurbanipal. They found 20,000 tablets covered in the tiny bird-like scratches of cuneiform. When they began to decipher them, the shock was seismic. They found the story of the flood, written centuries before the Bible. They found the story of the creation, of the dust and the blood, and they found the names, the Inanna, the Igigi, the Dingir. Suddenly the world realized that civilization did not begin in Rome, or Greece, or even Egypt. It began in the mud of Sumer, and it began with a pantheon of beings who behaved less like spirits and more like kings. But the true resurrection of the Anunnaki did not happen in the universities of the Victorian era. It happened in the imagination of the space age. In the 1970s, as humanity was launching its own rockets to the moon, we looked back at these ancient texts with new eyes. We no longer saw angels or demons. We saw reflections of ourselves. We saw technology. When a Sumerian text described a god descending in a fiery chamber, a 19th century priest thought of a chariot of fire. A 20th century engineer thought of a re-entry capsule. When a text described Enki mixing essences in a vat, a mystic thought of alchemy. A modern scientist thought of in vitro fertilization. This shift in perspective gave birth to the modern myth of the Anunnaki, the theory of the ancient astronaut. Central to this modern retelling is the work of Zecharia Sitchin. He looked at the cylinder seals that depicted the solar system. He counted the dots surrounding the sun. He saw the Earth, the Moon, Mars, Jupiter, and he saw one more. He called it Nibiru, the 12th planet, counting the sun and moon as celestial bodies as the ancients did. The theory posits that Nibiru is a rogue planet, a massive world on a highly elliptical orbit that swings through our inner solar system only once every 3,600 years. It is a winter planet, spending millennia in the deep freeze of interstellar space, retaining its heat only through a thick gold dust suspended atmosphere. According to this modern myth, the Anunnaki are the inhabitants of this wandering world. They did not come to Earth to explore. They came to mine. They needed gold, monatomic gold, to repair their failing atmosphere. They were not gods, they were desperate prospectors. This narrative reframes the entire history of Sumer. The Edin becomes a biodome. The strike of the Igigi becomes a labour dispute in a gold mine in South Africa. The creation of man becomes a genetic modification program to create a slave workforce. The ziggurat becomes a launch pad. Critics call this pseudoscience. They point to errors in translation, to the physics of orbits. But to dismiss it entirely is to miss the point of why this story resonates so deeply in the human heart. We embrace the story of the Anunnaki aliens because it solves the loneliness of the human condition. Look at the night sky. It is vast, cold, and silent. For thousands of years we've felt like orphans on a rock. We look at our own hands, hands that can split the atom and paint the Mona Lisa, and we ask, how did we get here? Why are we so different from the chimpanzee and the dolphin? The Anunnaki story offers an answer that is both terrifying and comforting. It says, you are not an accident, you're a design. It says that we have parents. They may be absentee parents, they may be stern parents who put us to work in the garden, but they are parents. They came from the stars, they made us in their image, and they promised to return. The concept of the 600-year orbit, the Shah, introduces a rhythm to history that is hypnotic. It suggests that civilization is cyclical. We rise when they are near, we fall when they depart. It suggests that the current silence of the gods is just a seasonal pause. We are currently in the winter of the orbit, but the summer is coming. If you walk through the ruins of Uruk today, the wind whistles through the broken brickwork. You can see the traces of the grid. You can see the layout of the streets where the black-headed people walked. And if you look closely at the reliefs, you see the symbols that spark the modern imagination. You see the watchers in their flying discs. You see the tree of life that looks like a double helix. You see the pine cone that looks like a device. Whether these are literal depictions of alien technology or metaphorical depictions of divine power almost doesn't matter. The effect is the same. They tell us that wisdom was handed down. It came from above. The legacy of the Anunnaki is not found in hidden spaceships or buried stargates. It is found in the very structure of your daily life. Look at your wrist. The watch you wear divides the hour into 60 minutes. Why 60? Because the Anunnaki used a base 60 number system. Every time you check the time, you're using Sumerian math. Look at the calendar on your wall. 12 months. Why 12? Because the Anunnaki divided the sky into 12 stations for the zodiac. Look at the courthouse in your city. The concept of written law, of judges, of contracts sealed with signatures. This is the gift of the me. We are living in the machine they built. We are still carrying the basket, though now the basket is a laptop or a smartphone. We are still digging the canals, though now they're fibre optic cables. We're still looking up at the sky, tracking the movements of Mars and Jupiter, trying to read our destiny in the stars. The alien theory is simply the latest version of the oldest religion. It is the belief that there is a higher order, a management that oversees the chaos of Earth. As we reach the end of our story, the question of were they real aliens fades into the background. What remains is the feeling they left behind, the feeling of the Edin, the feeling of the heavy, wet clay, the feeling of the starry night. The Anunnaki, whether they were gods, kings or astronauts, taught us the most important lesson of all, to look up, to organize, to build, and to remember that we are made of two things, the dust of the earth and the light of the stars. We are the bridge, and the bridge still stands. The wheel has turned full circle. We began in the mud of the Tigris, standing in the chaotic marshes of the pre-civilized world. We watched as the sky opened and the Anunnaki descended, bringing with them the heavy tools of order. We saw the Igigi strike, burning their spades in the night. We saw the laboratory where Enki mixed the clay and the blood to fashion a creature that could work. We survived the great reset of the flood, floating in the darkness of the sealed boat. We saw the Kingship lowered from heaven, a franchise of gold and measurement. We followed Inanna down into the dust of the underworld, where she was stripped of her power, and we watched Ninurta hack the source code of the universe to retrieve the tablet of Destinies. And finally, we look through the telescope of the modern age to see the 12th planet wandering in the dark, carrying the memory of our origins. The story of the Anunnaki is the story of us. It is the story of humanity coming to terms with its own intelligence and its own servitude. We are a species that feels like we don't quite belong here. And this myth tells us why. Because half of us belong somewhere else. But now, the work is done. The tablets are back in the sand. The ziggurats are silent. The great gods, Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, have retreated to the high orbits of their rest. The noise of the city fades away. The scratching of the scribe's stylus stops. The me, the gifts of civilization, are yours now to keep. The law, the time, the writing, the craft. You do not need to wait for the sky to open again. You have the tools, so let the heavy eyelids of history close. Let the weight of the basket slide from your shoulder. The foreman has gone home. The shift is over. The river flows quietly in the dark, washing away the silt of the day, returning the earth to the peace of the primeval water. You're safe in the boat. The storm has passed. The stars are watching Myanmar. They're far away. The foreman has gone home. The shift is over. The river flows quietly in the dark. If any moment in this journey awakens something in you, feel free to share it in the comments, not as noise but as a quiet offering, one more voice in the circle of our kind. If you'd like to follow where this path leads next, liking or subscribing helps keep the fire burning. Until we meet again, stay curious, stay thoughtful. Sleep well, child of the clay. Sleep well, child of the stars.